Ducklings.
Today's story was first published, or turned into a book, back in 1941. That's a long time ago. That's almost 80 years ago. This is a well-loved story, and I bet your parents and even grandparents know this story well. The book is based on a true story and tells the story of a pair of mallards, or ducks, who have 8 baby ducklings, and then are in search of the perfect place to make their home in Boston. Today's themes are family, safety, and perseverance. And today's question is, what makes a good home?
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. The next morning they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water. So the mallards followed them all around the pond to get another breakfast, better than the first. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard, as they climbed out onto the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over!" And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies with all those horrid things rushing around. We'll have to look somewhere else." So they flew over Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch the ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt, and all their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until new ones grew. But of course, they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park of the riverbank, and they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after the mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs and keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs to make sure they were all still there. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, and then Cack, and then Lack, and Mack, and Knack, and Quack, and Pack, and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take care of the good ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come to where they were called, to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt completely, perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." And before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell in line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There, they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk, went the horns, speeding the cars. Quack, said Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 went Jack, Cack, Lack, Back, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. Quack, quack, honk, tweet. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned over with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what? Ducks?" yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Mack, Lack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, all making in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the seat said, "Well, now ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose into the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street, right into the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policemen. The policemen smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. And all day long, they followed the swan boats to eat peanuts. And when night falls, they swim to the little island and go to sleep. For today's activity, I want you to think about any animal. It could be anything you choose. Maybe you love elephants, or maybe you watched our other videos, "There's an alligator under my bed," and you want to focus on alligators. Or maybe you have a dog or a cat at home. Today, I want you to think about what you would do to make the perfect home for that animal. Think about all the things the mallards considered during their journey. Now, let's get creative. Get a piece of paper, some coloring tools, whatever it is you like to use, and draw a picture of your animal in its perfect home. I would love to see these pictures. So, if you would like, you can ask your grown-up to take a picture of your picture and send it to me at thegivingprojectforchildren@gmail.com. Or you can tag me in it on social media. Let's continue to develop our love of reading together. Till next time.